Hey folks, David Stewart here. Story Algebra and the Sparkle Vampires of Twilight. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'd like to explain what I mean by story algebra and also talk about how the Sparkle Vampires in this particular novel are a good example of how story algebra works. Now, before I get any further, I'm going to be talking about spoilers from this Twilight book, so if you care about that, turn this off and go read Twilight, I guess. But otherwise, continue watching. If you've seen some of my previous Storycraft videos, you know that I talk about from time to time this triangle or pyramid of story, which is setting, characters, and plot. How those things interact, how they're presented, that makes the story in total. It's not just the plot, it's not just the characters, it's not just the settings, how all of them work. And I tend to describe it as a pyramid. You have the setting on the bottom, which is the time, the place, the limitations of a magic system if you're in a fantasy book, which vampires count as a fantasy book to me. All of those things make up the setting, the limitations of how you're going to operate in the story. The characters inhabit the setting. They have all the attitudes and understandings of the limitation that the setting would put upon them. And then at the top of that, you have the plot, which is the event sequence, which is executed by the characters. So that tends to lead people to the conclusion that you should start with world building, create characters that live in the world, and then create a plot that uses those characters. But that's not the only way to write a story. And in fact, that's not really the way I write stories personally at all. I tend to use more of like this story algebra thing, or really they just all happen together. I just like to think about them working in that particular way. Is my character acting appropriately for the setting? Is my plot an appropriate plot for the characters to actually execute? It helps for me to think about things in that particular way, but not necessarily construct them in that order. Although a lot of fantasy authors do start with world building and then go up from there. Now, the story algebra in Twilight is very interesting because what you have is the ability to adjust setting and adjust characters and adjust plot in order to have the story elements that you want to have in your book and to tell the story in the way that you want to tell it for it to be the most effective. You can adjust the setting, you can adjust all the different story elements that you want. You can work backwards on that pyramid in order to produce the most effective story. And so what Stephanie Meyer did in this is she created a different rule set for the vampires than what is standard. And the reason for this is that she wanted Bella, the main character, to meet Edward, the main love interest, because the primary story is a romance, in the mundane school setting. Why in the mundane school setting? Well, there's lots of reasons for that. First one is target demographic, which is going to be girls who are in school. Obviously, seeing a very mysterious and interesting and attractive boy is going to have a direct influence on them. It's going to help them relate to the story. But also it helps the mystery elements of the romance. So as things unfold, Bella becomes more and more curious about this weird person named Edward who continues to reveal stranger and stranger things about himself. And she starts to piece together the clues in order to figure out he's some sort of vampire. Now, obviously, if you're going to meet a vampire at school, the normal rule set is not going to apply, meaning the sun, daylight is not going to burn them up. They're not going to go sleep in a coffin when the sun is up. But you still want there to be some sort of mystery and limitation surrounding the person other than, well, they're a beautiful person. Because why not just have vampires walking around everywhere being beautiful people? Why do these vampires want to live as normal people and go to high school with high school kids? Why are they doing all this stuff? So the solution to that actually ends up being sparkle vampires. So if you imagine an algebra equation, you have a set of variables, maybe one variable, maybe multiple ones, and you have to balance the equation and add and subtract in order to make everything balanced. So in order to have these vampires that can go to school, but also there's some clues to them not being human. They're always missing when it's bright and sunny. And she lives in a place, I think it's called Forks. It's in Washington State, where it's cloudy all the time. So if it's cloudy, they can come to school, but if it's sunny, they can't. Well, that's a kind of a weird vampire thing. Well, do they burn up in the direct sun? Well, no, the result is they sparkle. So the sparkling is the reason that they can't walk around in the direct sun. Not because it would kill them, but because it would make it so obvious that they're not human that everybody's eyes would be peeled open by these crazy, inhuman-looking, sparkling things walking down the street. At the same time, in order for them to want to live a normal life, you have to create some backstory for that. And Stephanie Meyer indeed does that these are vampires who don't want to drink human blood. They drink like animal blood. And they want to live a normal human life. They don't want to live as outcasts, like living in the wilderness, hunting human beings. They want to be good vampires. And so that factors into that story equation as well. So when you have sparkle vampires, you're able to have vampires that live as normal people, that go to the school and are mysterious beings inhabiting the school and becoming interesting to the main character. You're able to have the vampires also have conflicts with other vampires, which is what happens in the third act of the book, is you have a conflict with vampires that live outside of normal society, which most vampires are going to, and you have still the ability to have the dangerous element of vampires. So vampires themselves represent something very, very interesting for a romance plot, and I'll talk about this in some other content. But a vampire represents not just beauty, but also danger. And so the danger element can be very attractive in a romance. And in order to hype up the danger, you have to have, of course, vampires want to drink blood. So vampires are really important for this to function. But in order for it to function, you can't have them burn up in the sunlight. So you create the solution to all those problems. Why they're not out in the sun, why they're in forks. It all comes down to sparkle vampires. It's an interesting look at the way that setting, characters, and plot can interact and the way that you can tweak those in order to tell the story that you want. Now, Stephanie Meyer could have told the story with characters that aren't out during the day. Like Bella meets a neighborhood kid at night and finds out he's a vampire. Now, she could have done that. But right away, you would have been dealing with a very different story than what you ended up having. She wanted to tell the story the way she wanted to tell it, which was having the characters meet at school. And I can't say that was a bad decision, because this has been a big hit as a result, probably of the choices she made for how she wanted the story to actually be executed. That it's a teen romance, but it has all these extra things added into it that kind of heighten the sex appeal and danger of what's going on, and also can be allegorical for other, physical wants and needs that you don't want to be so obvious with when you are targeting a younger demographic. You don't want to specifically talk about sex, and she doesn't really in this first book. She alludes to it in the second book, I think, which I haven't finished yet. But that's one of the things that you get from that. So you want to have those elements in there, and you want to tell it a certain way. The end result is you have a new mythos of the vampires, which includes sparkling rather than just burning up in the sun. So it's an interesting look at that. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully this has been informative and interesting to you to think about the much maligned sparkle vampires. I will say that I've never seen the movies, so I heard that the special effects for the sparkle vampires were quite bad, and so maybe that has a lot to do with why people didn't like them. To me, I just mostly was like, well, I like there to be a danger element to being a vampire. Like the sun can destroy you, or something else can be your Achilles heel. In this case, there's not any Achilles heel other than being discovered. That's the Achilles heel. The sparkles will let you be discovered. Otherwise, you're beautiful, powerful, and without regret. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget the Right Stream happens every single Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern. My books are out if you want. The newest book is Crown of Sight. That's a high fantasy novella, very quick 2-hour read, very fun. Of course, if you get on my mailing list, you will get this book for free, Water of Awakening. This is the first book of the Eternal Dream saga, and it's quite a hefty book, so you can get that ebook for free. dbspress.com/list, and I have a brand new horror book coming out very shortly, so make sure you stay tuned to have information on that if you like Lovecraftian or cosmic horror. I'll see you guys next time.